A billionaire gave 4 black credit cards to 4 women to test them. But what the housekeeper bought left him speechless. Before we start, tell us in the comments, what city are you watching from? And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. I can't take it anymore, James. It was a nightmare, Oliver Grant said, throwing his blazer onto the couch with frustration. She took a selfie with the dessert, called me her favorite ex, and even tried to toast to getting back together with a glass of sparkling wine. Am I a man or a rising stock on the market? James, his personal assistant for 8 years, watched calmly from the open kitchen like someone who had seen worse. Sir, it was just dinner. Dinner? James, she said she missed me. And the helicopter. In the same sentence. People don't see me anymore. Just the bank account. Oliver dropped into an armchair, running a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. James took a deep breath. Sir, maybe it's time to take a break. A trip, perhaps. Fresh air. Oliver ignored him. And then, in one of those impulsive bursts of either brilliance or madness, he had an idea. No, that's it. I'm tired of fake smiles, of hidden intentions. He turned, eyes bright with energy. You know what I'm going to do? I'm afraid to ask. A test, an experiment, a behavioral study. James narrowed his eyes. That never meant anything good. Sir, every time you use that tone, either someone ends up crying or it makes the news. This time it'll be different. I'm going to give an unlimited credit card to 4 women in my life, and I'll watch what each of them does with it. No instructions, no rules, just freedom. And then, you're going to judge them all? Isn't that a little manipulative? I won't judge. I'll observe. They'll reveal themselves on their own. Can I at least ask who the lucky ones are? Daisy, of course. She'll love this. Then Susanna, my assistant, she's always saying she knows how to make strategic decisions. Let's see what she does outside the office. Valeria, too. She's elegant but calculating, always flirting with me. And, he paused for a second, and Grace. James' eyes widened. Grace? The housekeeper? Exactly. The one who once threatened me with a wooden spoon because I stirred her risotto? That one. She's the only one who's never asked me for anything, never treated me like a trophy. She hums while vacuuming and calls me Mr. Grant like she's bored. I want to see what she'd do with power in her hands. Or how dangerous that could be, James replied. Oliver, this isn't just wild, it's risky. You know this could go very wrong, right? Oliver ignored the warning. He was already on his phone, sending instructions to have the cards issued. The next morning, the penthouse was unusually quiet, which usually meant Oliver was up to something. One by one, the black envelopes were prepared, names written in silver ink by hand. Oliver arranged them like a chess master setting up his board. Susanna arrived first, always efficient with a perfect blazer and sharp heels. Good morning, Mr. Grant. I have something for you, he said, handing her the envelope. A gift, a little something for always being by my side. She raised an eyebrow. Are you dying? Not yet. Enjoy, it's yours for 3 days. No limit. She left the office with a slight blush and a smile that didn't hide her ambition. Next came Valeria, dressed like she was heading to a fashion shoot, even though it was just Tuesday morning. This some kind of trick, Oliver? She asked, looking at the envelope with elegant suspicion. It's just a gesture. Spend it however you like, for 3 days. Valeria smiled like she already knew exactly what she would do. Daisy showed up shortly after, stepping off the elevator like a reality TV star. A present? Ah, Ollie, I knew you still loved me. She held the card like it was a toothpaste commercial. It's yours for 3 days. Do whatever you want, he said with a smile. Just a little gift, that's all. Then came Grace. She walked in from the kitchen side, holding a bowl of raw dough and a dish towel over her shoulder. Hey boss, that new oven's making weird noises again. Kinda sounds like it's coughing. Grace, Oliver called with a soft smile. I've got something for you. He discreetly handed her the black envelope. She looked at it like he'd just offered her a NASA contract. You're firing me? No, it's just a gift, a thank you. She opened the envelope slowly, saw the black card, and her eyes went wide. I gave you banana bread yesterday, and it was burnt. Are you feeling okay? Just take it, Grace. But what am I supposed to do with this? Use it however you want. It's yours for 3 days. Wow, seriously? I can buy whatever I want? Yes, and there's no limit, Oliver said, already walking away. Hours later, Oliver was in his office, a glass of whiskey in hand, looking out at the city through the glass window. "Sir," James said as he entered, "the transactions have started showing up." "Anything unexpected?" James hesitated. 3 helicopters, a $15,000 dress, 5-star hotel bookings. Nothing surprising. Oliver just nodded. "And Grace's card?" James looked at the tablet. "Neighborhood grocery store, rice, poster paint, diapers, secondhand toys, and 200 hot dogs." Oliver slowly turned to face his assistant. "Hot dogs? 200. He leaned back in his chair with a crooked smile. "Now I'm really curious to know what she's up to." The next morning, Oliver was sitting at the penthouse dining table, absent-mindedly stirring his coffee while James organized some documents by the window. The silence was broken by a tablet notification sound. "Sir, more card activity just came in," James announced, adjusting his glasses. Oliver looked up, curious. "Tell me what's new." James checked all the card transactions. In just a few minutes, he had the full report. Daisy rented a helicopter to make an entrance at the Skyline Club. From what I saw on her social media, it was to impress a group of influencers. Susanna bought a whole new wardrobe at Bergdorf Goodman. $5,000 just on shoes. And Valeria? Hired an event planner to throw a gala next weekend. The theme is contemporary elegance. She's already sent invitations to half the Seattle elite. Oliver chuckled quietly, shaking his head. Predictable, like a Sunday afternoon romantic movie. "And Grace?" James asked, scrolling on the tablet. "Well, her purchases are still a mystery. Tell me, another 200 colorful balloons, 30 pounds of sugar, arts and crafts supplies, paints, brushes, and a rented van for this afternoon." Oliver frowned. "A van? For transporting?" James paused, reading carefully. "Supplies for charity event." "Charity event? Grace is organizing a charity event?" "Apparently so. And sir, she also bought a clown costume." Oliver almost spit out his coffee. "A clown costume?" "Medium size, red nose included." Oliver stayed silent for a few seconds, processing the information. Then he started laughing. "James, of all the things I imagined might come out of this experiment, Grace as a clown was definitely not on the list." "Maybe she's planning a career change, sir." "Or maybe," Oliver paused, thoughtful, "maybe she's a lot more interesting than I thought." James watched him with a discreet smile. "You're curious, aren't you?" "Very. And you know what happens when I get curious. You do something impulsive and probably problematic." "Exactly." Oliver stood up and walked to the window. "I need to find out what she's up to. Sir, with all due respect, spying on the maid might not be the best idea." "It's not spying, James. It's scientific observation." "Of course it is." Oliver spent the rest of the morning restless, trying to work but constantly distracted. By 2 in the afternoon, he couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed the keys to his most discreet car, a black SUV, and left the penthouse. Following the address James had gotten from the van rental company, Oliver arrived at a neighborhood he rarely visited. The houses were simple but well cared for, and in the distance he saw a small building with a sign that read, "St. Francis Home, Shelter and Support." Oliver parked across the street and watched. The van was there, back doors open, and Grace was moving in and out, carrying colorful boxes. She wore an old t-shirt and jeans, her hair in a messy bun, and even from far away, he could hear her cheerful voice chatting with someone. After a few minutes of watching, Oliver made an impulsive decision. He got out of the car, crossed the street, and approached the orphanage entrance. "Excuse me," he said to an older woman at the front desk. "I'm Oliver Grant. I heard about the wonderful work you're doing here, and I'd like to help." The woman looked at him, surprised. "Oh, that's lovely. I'm Margaret, the director. Today we're having a special party for the children, thanks to the generosity of a truly wonderful young lady." "What a coincidence," Oliver smiled. "May I take a look?" Margaret led him down a simple hallway until they reached an inner courtyard where chaos had taken over. There were about 20 kids running in every direction, colorful balloons hanging from trees, tables covered with bright paper, and in the middle of it all, Grace. She was wearing a clown costume, a yellow and blue striped jumpsuit, big red shoes, and a rubber nose, and was trying to teach a group of kids how to make balloon animals. The result was a hilarious disaster. "So everyone, now you twist it like this and bang, the balloon popped in her hands. Oops, looks like that one turned into confetti." The kids burst out laughing, and Grace laughed too, pulling pieces of balloon out of her hair. All right, let's try again. This time with less pressure and more hope. Oliver leaned against a nearby tree, watching in fascination. Grace was completely at ease, playing with the children as if they were old friends. She sang kid songs off-key, made funny faces, and when a little girl got hurt and started to cry, Grace immediately dropped everything and ran to comfort her. Hey, princess, what happened? Grace knelt down beside the girl, taking off her clown nose to speak more seriously. I fell, the child sobbed. Let me see. Grace gently examined the scraped knee. You know what I think? I think this injury needs a magic bandage. She pulled a colorful band-aid from her bag and placed it on the girl's knee. There, now you've got super fast healing powers. The girl stopped crying and smiled. Really? Really. But it only works if you do 3 jumps. The girl jumped happily, and Grace clapped like she had just witnessed a miracle. Oliver felt something strange in his chest as he watched that scene. There was a genuineness in Grace that he rarely saw in his world. You must be Mr. Grant, said a voice behind him. He turned around and saw Lucy, one of the helpers, smiling. Margaret told me you wanted to help. It's great to have you here. Oliver looked toward the voice and saw Grace approaching, still dressed as a clown, but now without the red nose. Mr. Grant? She said, wide-eyed. What are you doing here? Oliver hesitated. I heard about the party and wanted to contribute. Grace looked at him with suspicion. How did you hear about the party? I have contacts in charity organizations, he lied, not very convincingly. Oh. Grace didn't seem entirely convinced, but she smiled. Well, since you're here, you can help me. I've got 200 hot dogs to serve and only 2 hands. Of course. Grace led him to a table with a makeshift grill and piles of buns and sausages. Do you know how to make hot dogs? She asked, handing him a spatula. I have a master's degree in business from Harvard. I think I can figure it out. Perfect. Because I have a PhD in burning food, so we're the perfect team. Oliver laughed, picking up the first sausage. In the first 5 minutes, he dropped half the sausages on the ground, got ketchup on his expensive dress shirt, and nearly set the buns on fire. Mr. Grant, Grace said, watching the mess, have you ever considered a career in demolition? Very funny. Let me take over. You can hand out the plates. While Grace took control of the grill with surprising skill, Oliver handed out hot dogs to the kids. With each one he gave out, he heard excited stories, received crayon drawings, and got bombarded with questions about his job. Are you really rich? Asked a boy around 8 years old. A little. Oliver replied, not quite sure how to explain. Cool. Can you buy a dragon? There are no real dragons. Yes, there are. Grace said she's seen one. Oliver looked at Grace, who pretended not to hear the conversation while flipping sausages. Grace said that? She did. She tells the best stories. By the end of the afternoon, when the kids were full and worn out, Oliver helped Grace clean everything up. They worked in a comfortable silence, picking up burst balloons and putting toys away. Why do you do this? Oliver asked when they were alone in the yard. Do what? Grace paused her sweeping and looked at him. All of this. Spending your free time here, using your own money. Well, my money now, but you get the idea. Grace shrugged. Because someone has to, and because these kids deserve to smile. But you don't get anything out of it. Yes, I do, she smiled. I get the best part of my day. Oliver felt that strange tightness in his chest again. There was something about Grace that touched him in a way he couldn't fully understand. Thank you for letting me help today, he said. Thank you for not burning the whole place down, she replied, laughing. As they walked toward the exit, Oliver realized his whole perspective on Grace had completely changed. She wasn't just the funny housekeeper who sang off-key in his kitchen. She was someone with a heart bigger than any fortune he could ever have. The next day, Oliver couldn't stop thinking about Grace. The image of her comforting that little girl, how naturally she treated the children, the way she turned an ordinary afternoon into something magical. All of it echoed in his mind while he tried to focus on spreadsheets at the office. James, he said, setting his pen down. What kind of coffee does Grace like? James looked up from the documents, surprised. Sir? Coffee? Grace? What's her favorite? Well, she always says the Italian machine coffee is way too full of itself and prefers the cheap instant stuff we keep for the occasional guest. Oliver smiled. Perfect. Cancel my afternoon appointments. An hour later, Oliver found Grace in the penthouse kitchen, scrubbing a pan with energy while humming a completely off-key country song. Grace, he said, walking over, how about we get some coffee? Somewhere outside. She stopped scrubbing and looked at him like he'd just suggested a trip to the moon. Coffee? Us? Yeah, I know a quiet place. Mr. Grant, are you going through some kind of midlife crisis? Because yesterday you showed up at the orphanage out of nowhere, and today you want to grab coffee with me. I'm starting to think you hit your head. Oliver laughed. Maybe I did. So are you in? Grace looked down at her clothes, jeans with cleaning product stains and a t-shirt that had clearly seen better days. Like this? Not that I've got anything fancy in the closet, but this is perfect just the way it is. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a small, cozy cafe downtown. Oliver had chosen the place on purpose, far from the fancy restaurants where he was usually seen, a spot where they could talk without interruptions. Grace stirred sugar into her coffee with a bit too much energy, clearly nervous. So, she said, avoiding his eyes, is this the famous rich people coffee? Because it tastes just like the one Mrs. Martha serves at the bakery on the corner. It's exactly the same, Oliver smiled. That's what I was going for. Oh. She took a sip and made a face. Well, at least it's not as pretentious as that Italian machine in your kitchen. That thing sounds like it's having a nervous breakdown. Oliver burst out laughing. You've got strong opinions about my coffee machine. I've got strong opinions about a lot of things. Margaret always said opinions are like noses. Everybody's got one, and most people think theirs is the best. Margaret sounds wise. Grace went quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee more calmly. She is. She's very special. Oliver noticed the shift in her tone and decided to take a chance. Yesterday at the orphanage, you seemed to know the place well. I do, she shrugged, trying to sound casual. I grew up there. The simplicity of her response caught Oliver off guard. He expected her to dodge the topic, hesitate, maybe avoid it entirely. You grew up at the orphanage? From day 1 to 18. My mother left me there when I was a baby. According to Margaret, she was very young and had no means to raise me. She left a note saying she loved me, but wanted me to have a better chance in life. She spoke as if she were talking about the weather, but Oliver could see the quiet pain behind her forced smile. Grace, Hey, don't give me that sad puppy face, she interrupted with a laugh. It wasn't all bad. Margaret's an angel. The other kids became my family, and I learned to cook, helping out in the kitchen since I was 8. That's where I discovered my natural talent for burning food. But it must have been hard. Sometimes, she admitted, letting her guard down for a moment. Especially when the other kids got adopted and I stayed behind. After a while, you just get it, you know? Maybe it's just not meant for you. Maybe you're the one who stays behind to look after the others. Oliver felt a tightness in his chest. There was so much strength in this woman, so much resilience hidden behind her humor. And at 18? At 18, you leave. That's the rule. I got a job at a sandwich shop, shared a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, and visited the kids whenever I could, until I found the ad for the job at your place and, well, you know the rest. Your coffee is terrible. Your coffee maker thinks it's better than everyone else, but you pay well, and don't complain when I sing into the vacuum. You sing very off-key, Oliver said, trying to lighten the mood. I know. Grace laughed wholeheartedly. It's a talent. Not everyone can make a beautiful song sound like nails on a chalkboard. They kept talking for another hour about random and trivial things, but Oliver felt like he was truly getting to know Grace for the first time. She was funny, smart, strong, and above all, genuine in a way he had forgotten even existed. When they returned to the penthouse, Oliver's mind was full of new thoughts. Grace disappeared into the kitchen, returning to her world of pots and off-key singing, but something had changed in the way he saw her. Mr. Grant, James said, appearing with a worried look. There were some calls while you were out. Anything important? Daisy called 3 times. Apparently, she heard about the charity event and wants to get involved. She used the words can't miss media opportunity. Oliver frowned. How did she find out? Susanna also called. Apparently, The two of them had lunch and started scheming. Planning ways to support your new philanthropic initiative. They don't even know what the initiative is. No, but Daisy already posted a photo on Instagram with the caption, "Getting ready with special surprises for a cause very close to my heart." It has 15,000 likes. Oliver sighed. And Valeria? She called offering her event planner's services. Said such a noble cause deserves a presentation to match. In other words, they smelled an opportunity and want to take advantage of it. Exactly, sir. Oliver looked toward the kitchen, where he could hear Grace humming a tune while preparing dinner. The difference was striking. While Grace had used the card quietly, without showing off, without selfies, just to make children smile, the other three were already calculating how to turn any involvement into personal gain. James, cancel any meetings they want to set up for now. Sir? I need to think. And I need to figure out who's really worth having around. James nodded, understanding. And the credit card experiment? How would you evaluate the results so far? Oliver stayed silent for a moment, listening to Grace's off-key voice echoing through the penthouse. It's been more revealing than I expected, James. Much more. That night, while eating dinner alone in the large dining room, Oliver reflected on how just 3 days had changed his perspective on the people around him. Daisy, Susanna, and Valeria had reacted exactly as he'd expected, seeing opportunity where they should have seen responsibility. But Grace had completely surprised him. And now, knowing her story, he admired even more the woman who turned his house into a home with her genuine, unpretentious presence. The question bothering him now wasn't about the character of those around him. It was about what he would do with these discoveries. Oliver spent Friday morning pacing around the penthouse like a caged lion. The time had come to face the results of his experiment, and for some reason, it made him more nervous than any business meeting he had ever attended. James, he said, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. Confirm they'll all be here at 2 o'clock. Confirmed, sir. Daisy will arrive by helicopter as usual. Susanna is rearranging her schedule to be here on time. Valeria, well, she said she'll be fashionably late, whatever that means. And Grace? Grace said, and I quote, "If it's about money, can I make sandwiches for everyone? Because those talks make me hungry." Oliver laughed for the first time that day. She knows she'll have to return the card? Actually, sir, she tried to return it yesterday. She said 3 days of unlimited buying power was more than enough for a lifetime. At exactly 2 o'clock, the penthouse living room looked like a scene from a suspense movie. Daisy had arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a dress that cost more than most people make in a year, standing strategically near the window where the light hit her perfectly. Susanna was sitting with perfect posture, tablet in hand, ready to take notes, as if it were a board meeting. Valeria showed up exactly 10 minutes late, as promised, wearing sunglasses even though they were indoors. Grace was the last to appear, coming out of the kitchen with her hands still damp from washing dishes, drying them on her apron. Sorry I'm late, folks. I was finishing cleaning the oven. That thing looked like a battlefield. Oliver took in the striking contrast between the 4 women. While 3 of them looked ready for a photo shoot, Grace looked like she'd just come out of a fight with rebellious appliances. Well, Oliver began, standing in the center of the room, first of all, thank you all for being here. 3 days ago, I gave each of you a credit card as a gift, to use however you wanted. But the truth is, it wasn't a gift. It was an experiment. Daisy, Valeria, and Susanna exchanged shocked looks at Oliver's revelation. And it was an amazing experience, Ollie. Daisy interrupted, flashing a bright smile. It really made me reflect on the endless possibilities in life. Susanna gave a professional nod. It was a unique opportunity to explore personal strategic investments. Valeria simply gave a graceful nod, as if she were agreeing with something deeply philosophical. Grace, on the other hand, was looking at the other 3 like they were speaking another language. Experiment? She mumbled. I thought it was just a thank you gift, and that it was for buying stuff. Grace, Oliver said, smiling, why don't you go first and tell us how you used the card? She blushed slightly. Oh, nothing big. I bought a few things for the kids at the orphanage. Food, toys, supplies for activities. You know, normal things. Normal? Daisy raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. Honey, normal would be a spa day or a shopping spree in Beverly Hills. Or a professional development course, Susanna added. Something to add value to your resume. Grace looked at them, genuinely puzzled. Why would I need a spa day? I shower every day and my skin's doing fine. And what kind of course teaches you how to make kids smile? Because that's what the money paid for, smiles. Valeria gave a slightly condescending laugh. That's sweet, Grace, but there are more refined ways to make a social impact. Like what? Grace asked, sincerely curious. A gala event, for example, Valeria replied. Gathering influential people, creating positive media buzz, building a network for future donations. Exactly, Daisy agreed. I used the card to invest in my digital presence. I documented the whole experience on social media to inspire my followers to think about philanthropy. Grace blinked a few times. You took pictures of the money? I captured the experience, dear. The process, the journey of discovery. Oh, Grace scratched her head. And the hungry kids, were they happy seeing your pictures or? A heavy silence fell over the room. Oliver had to bite his lip to keep from laughing. Susanna cleared her throat, trying to regain control of the conversation. Grace, it's not that our approaches are better or worse. They're just more strategic. For instance, I used the opportunity to completely update my professional wardrobe. That allows me to make better impressions in key meetings, which eventually leads to more business opportunities, and in turn, more resources for charity. Grace stared at her for a long moment. So, you bought clothes so you can make more money to give to charity later? Exactly. But in the meantime, the kids are still hungry today? Why? Susanna stumbled. It's a long-term vision. I see, Grace nodded slowly. Kind of like when I decide to do the dishes tomorrow so I can watch TV today. Only difference is, no one goes hungry while waiting for me to wash dishes. Oliver had to turn toward the window to hide his laughter. Daisy, sensing the conversation wasn't going her way, tried to shift the tone. Grace, sweetheart, what you did is admirable, of course. But let's be honest here, she said with a dramatic pause. Don't you think there's a small chance you chose to help the orphanage because you knew Oliver would be impressed? The room went quiet. Grace looked genuinely confused. Impressed with what? With your kindness, your generosity. Daisy said with a sweet smile, though her eyes were sharp. It's actually a very smart strategy. Strategy? Grace repeated the word like it was in Chinese. Susanna leaned forward, joining Daisy's lead. What Daisy's saying is, it would be natural for someone in your position to want to make a good impression on the boss through generous gestures. Grace looked from one woman to the next, then at Valeria, who was observing the exchange like it was a sociology case study, and finally at Oliver. Let me get this straight, she said slowly. You think I helped those kids to impress Mr. Grant? We're not accusing, Daisy said quickly, just pointing out that it would be an understandable motivation. Grace went quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, to everyone's surprise, she started laughing. Seriously? Grace said, still laughing. You really think I came up with some master plan to impress the boss by helping orphans? It's not impossible, Susanna muttered. Susanna, sweetheart, Grace replied with exaggerated patience. If I wanted to impress Mr. Grant, I would have bought ingredients to bake a decent cake, because so far, all I've managed to do is burn cookies and make sticky risotto. Trust me, charity wasn't exactly on my how to impress the boss list. Oliver stood in silence, feeling a strange mix of anger and admiration. Anger at the way Daisy and Susanna were going after Grace, and admiration for how naturally she stood her ground. Besides, Grace went on, I've been helping those kids for 2 years, way before I started working here. So unless I have psychic powers and somehow knew my future boss would one day pull a crazy credit card experiment, I think we can drop the conspiracy theory. Valeria finally took off her sunglasses. 2 years? You've been helping the orphanage for 2 years? Every Friday. Sometimes Saturdays too, when they need extra help. Grace shrugged. Margaret always needs an extra pair of hands, and I like the kids. They're funny and honest, very different from some people I know. That last sentence came with a pointed look at Daisy and Susanna. Oliver felt a tightness in his chest. All this time, while Grace worked for him, she had kept up this quiet commitment to the orphanage. She'd never mentioned it, never asked for special time off, never used it as an excuse for anything. Grace, he said, finally finding his voice. Why didn't you ever tell me about the orphanage? She looked surprised. Why would I? It's just something I do in my free time, like when you play golf or go to those boring business meetings. The difference is my hobby involves fewer clubs and more dirty diapers. Daisy made one last desperate attempt. But you have to admit, Grace, using his money for personal activities is a little inappropriate. Grace gave her a look Oliver had never seen before. Not anger, but something closer to disappointment. Daisy, you used the card to rent a helicopter for a dramatic entrance at a club. Susanna bought clothes that cost more than what I make in 6 months. Valeria hired an event planner for a party that hasn't even happened yet. And you all think it's inappropriate that I bought food for hungry children? The silence that followed was deafening. You know what I think? Grace said, standing up. I think you're upset because you didn't think of it first. Deep down, you know you spent the money on things that only benefit yourselves, and now you're trying to make it look like I did something wrong. She turned to Oliver. Mr. Grant, thank you for the card. That was generous of you, but next time you want to test someone's character, maybe choose more carefully. Because clearly, some people here are better actresses than I thought. And with that, Grace walked out of the room, leaving behind an awkward silence and 4 people with very different expressions. Oliver looked at Daisy, Susanna, and Valeria, seeing them in a completely different light. That conversation had revealed far more than he'd expected. Not just how each of them had spent the money, but who they truly were when faced with genuine honesty. Any doubt he'd had about Grace's motives was gone. In fact, now he was certain he'd found the only truly selfless person in his entire social circle. And that scared him as much as it impressed him. After Grace left the room, the silence lingered for several uncomfortable seconds. Daisy was the first to break it, nervously fixing her hair. Well, that was intense, she said, trying to keep her tone light. Susanna snapped her tablet shut. Oliver, I need to ask, why did you really do this? Because it clearly wasn't just a gift, like you said. Oliver turned to them, still processing everything that had just happened. You want the truth? That would be a good start, Valeria said, putting her sunglasses back on. It was a test. I wanted to see how each of you would react to having unlimited resources. Daisy stood up abruptly. A test? You tricked us. I gave you free money to spend however you wanted. Where's the trick? You used us like lab rats, Susanna protested. That's manipulation, Oliver. Manipulation would have been telling you how to spend it. I didn't say a word, I just watched the choices you made on your own. Valeria let out a dry, humorless laugh. And what was the result of your scientific experiment, Dr. Grant? Oliver looked at each of them. You really want to know? We do, said Daisy, folding her arms. Daisy, you used the money to create content for social media. Susanna, you invested in yourself thinking about long-term financial return. Valeria, you planned an event to impress influential people. And Grace bought food for hungry children. So what? Daisy shot back. My personal brand strategy could inspire thousands of followers. It could inspire, but did it? Or did it just get likes? That's irrelevant, Susanna cut in. My investment in professional networking has the potential for a much bigger return than any one-time donation. Potential, Oliver repeated. That's the key word. Grace didn't think about potential. She saw a need and met it. Right away. Valeria sighed dramatically. Oliver, you're being too romantic about charity. The real world requires strategy. Does it? Or have you just convinced yourselves of that to justify sophisticated selfishness? The mood in the room turned tense. The 3 women looked at one another, clearly unsettled by where the conversation was going. You know what, Oliver? Said Daisy, picking up her purse. If you wanted a saint, you should have said so from the beginning. Some of us prefer to live in the real world. Where helping orphan children isn't part of the real world, Oliver asked. Where adult relationships aren't based on mind games, Susanna replied, standing up as well. This wasn't a mind game, it was a moment of honesty. Maybe the first we've had. Valeria was the last to rise. Oliver, dear, you're confusing naivety with virtue. It's a common mistake among wealthy men who get bored. Maybe. Or maybe you're confusing cynicism with sophistication. The 3 of them walked out of the penthouse without another word, leaving Oliver alone with his thoughts. and the sound of Grace's voice still echoing through the kitchen. The next day, Oliver woke up with a decision already made. He found Grace in the kitchen, as usual, but this time she was unusually quiet, just stirring a pot of oatmeal without her usual off-key humming. "Grace," he said, approaching her carefully, "about yesterday." "Oh, hi, Mr. Grant," she answered without looking at him. "Sorry if I came on a bit strong. Sometimes my mouth works faster than my brain." "Don't apologize. You were standing up for something important." Grace finally looked at him, her expression curious. "I was?" "You were, and it gave me an idea." Oliver took a deep breath. "I want to officially support the orphanage, organize a big professional charity event that can really make a difference." Grace dropped the spoon into the pot. "Seriously?" "Seriously, but there's one condition." "Knew there'd be a catch," she muttered. "I want you to be the one to present the project." Grace looked at him like he'd suggested she fly to the moon. "Me? Mr. Grant, have you hit your head? I can barely order pizza on the phone without stuttering. You can talk to 20 noisy kids at the same time. You can calm down a crying child. You can turn 200 hot dogs into a party. You can present a project." "That's completely different. Kids don't judge me if I mess up. Rich, important adults do." "Grace, you know the orphanage better than anyone. You know the needs, the children, their dreams. No one can tell that story better than you." Grace started pacing around the kitchen. "Mr. Grant, I don't know how to speak in public. I don't even know what to wear to something like that. I'm going to look ridiculous and ruin everything." "No, you won't. We'll practice." "Practice? How?" "Start by talking to me. Tell me about the orphanage like I've never been there." Grace looked at him suspicious. "Now?" "Now. But I'm making oatmeal, and I'm wearing a teddy bear apron. Not exactly the ideal setup for an important speech." "Perfect. If you can convince me in a teddy bear apron, imagine in a formal dress." Grace sighed and stood in front of him, still holding the wooden spoon. "All right. She cleared her throat. St. Francis Home is... It's a place where..." She stopped. "This is ridiculous. Keep going." "St. Francis Home is a place where children who don't have families find..." She waved her hands so much she splashed oatmeal on the wall. "Oh my goodness, look what I did." Oliver laughed. "Grace, take a breath. Forget it's a speech. Just tell me about the kids." She took a deep breath and tried again. "The kids at the orphanage. They're special. Each one has a story, a unique personality. There's Tommy, who draws superheroes on every piece of paper he finds. Sarah, who sings in the shower and thinks no one hears her. And little Michael, who collects pebbles because each one has a different face." As Grace talked about the children, she changed. Her voice became stronger, her gestures more natural. Oliver could feel the genuine passion in every word. "They don't need pity," she continued. "They need chances. Someone to believe they can be anything they want. Margaret does that every day, but she's only one person, and there are always more kids arriving, more dreams to feed." "Perfect," Oliver said when she finished. "That was exactly it." "Really? But I didn't even talk about numbers, budgets, or strategies." "You talked about what really matters, about people. That's what moves hearts and opens wallets." For the next 2 weeks, Grace practiced her speech religiously. Oliver would find her in the kitchen each morning, gesturing toward the pots and pans as if they were her audience. Once, she was so focused that she didn't notice him walk in and continued her presentation to the blender. "And that's why we need your support," she told the appliance. "Together, we can change lives and..." She spotted Oliver watching her. "How long have you been standing there?" "Since the part where you called the blender distinguished audience." "Oh no, how embarrassing." Grace covered her face with her hands. "I've been practicing so much I'm starting to see people where there aren't any." "You're doing great. Your passion is contagious." "My passion is driving me crazy. Last night I dreamed I was presenting to a room full of forks and knives." Oliver laughed out loud. "How did it go?" "The forks applauded, but the knives were divided," she said, then laughed at her own joke. "Get it? Divided? Like when you cut something?" "I get it," Oliver said, still laughing. "See? Even your nerves are funny." As the days went by, Oliver realized his favorite moments were the ones he spent helping Grace get ready. There was something comforting in the way she turned her fears into jokes, in how her insecurities made her more human, not less. One afternoon, while going over the speech for the 10th time, Grace stumbled on a word and said, philanthropy, as philanthropy. Philanthropy, Oliver repeated, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, maybe that's philanthropy for people who like to go hunting? Grace guessed, then dropped into the chair. Mr. Grant, I'm not cut out for this. I'm going to make a fool of myself in front of all those important people. Oliver sat down beside her. Grace, do you know what sets you apart from all those important people? They know how to pronounce philanthropy. They know how to pretend to care. You actually care. And that's worth more than all the perfectly pronounced words in the world. Grace looked into his eyes, and for a moment, the kitchen went quiet. There was something different in the air, a tension that had nothing to do with speech anxiety. Mr. Grant, she said softly, why is this so important to you? Because, Oliver hesitated, because you reminded me there are things more important than money, and because I want the world to see what I see when I look at you. Grace blushed and looked away. What do you see when you look at me? Oliver felt his heart race. That question carried so many possibilities, so many paths he wasn't sure he should take. I see someone who makes the world a better place just by being in it, he said, honestly. The silence that followed was unlike any before. It was full of meaning, of unspoken feelings, of a connection that grew stronger with each day of practice, every laugh they shared, every moment when two very different worlds met in that kitchen, full of pots and dreams. 2 weeks later, the day of the event arrived like a long-awaited storm. The grand ballroom at the Seattle Convention Center had been transformed into something straight out of a movie. Soft lights, elegant floral arrangements, and an atmosphere that screamed wealth and influence. Oliver watched the final preparations with a mix of pride and nerves. Sir, James said, appearing beside him with a tablet. We have 250 confirmed guests, including 15 CEOs from major corporations and at least 10 local media journalists. And Grace? Oliver asked, adjusting his tie for the third time. She's in the makeshift dressing room, practicing her speech in front of the mirror. I heard her call her reflection the most honest audience she's ever had. Oliver smiled, but he couldn't hide his concern. Over the past 2 weeks, he had seen Grace grow from a nervous housekeeper into a passionate advocate for the orphanage, but events like this were uncharted territory for her. James, are we sure this is a good idea? Sir, if I may speak plainly, Miss Grace has something most of these people don't, sincerity, and that's worth more than all the public speaking courses in the world. In the dressing room, Grace was having her own little crisis. She was wearing a simple but elegant black dress that Oliver had insisted on buying for her, and for the first time in years, she felt completely out of place. Okay, Grace, she mumbled to the mirror. You've got this. They're just people. Very rich, important people who could ruin your life with one wrong word, but still, just people. She took a deep breath and began rehearsing. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Grace, and she paused. My name is Grace, and I work for Mr. Grant. No, that sounds like I'm just the maid. My name is Grace, and I'm here to talk about. She waved her hand so much that she knocked over a glass of water. Perfect. Haven't even started, and I'm already knocking things over. A soft knock on the door interrupted her. Grace? Oliver's voice came from the other side. May I come in? Sure, but get ready to witness a live disaster. Oliver stepped in and found Grace trying to mop up the spilled water with toilet paper. How are you feeling? Like I swallowed a swarm of bees, angry ones. It's normal to be nervous. Mr. Grant, nervous is when you forget where you left your keys. This is full-on panic. I'm going to walk out there, open my mouth, and instead of smart words, a weird noise will come out that I won't even recognize. Oliver came closer. Grace, look at me. She did, and he could see the real fear in her eyes. You're not doing this for them, he said. You're doing it for the kids. Think of Tommy and his superhero drawings, Sarah singing in the shower, Michael and his special little rocks. Grace took a deep breath. You're right. They deserve for me to at least try not to look like a fool. You won't look like a fool, and if you do, I'll be right there to help. 20 minutes later, the event was in full swing. The ballroom was packed with Seattle's elite, all elegantly dressed and speaking in hushed, refined tones. Oliver moved among the guests, but his eyes kept drifting back to Grace, who stood near the stage, clearly trying not to hyperventilate. Oliver! A familiar voice called out behind him. He turned and saw Daisy approaching, stunning in a red dress that probably cost more than Grace made in a year. "Daisy, I didn't expect to see you here." "Oh, you didn't really think I'd miss such an important event, did you?" She smiled, but there was something sharp in her eyes. "Especially after I heard your housekeeper would be the star of the evening." "Grace is not just my housekeeper," Oliver said, a bit more firmly than he meant to. "Of course not," Daisy agreed with sugary sweetness. "I've heard you two have been spending quite a bit of time together lately." "How romantic." Before Oliver could respond, Susanna appeared at Daisy's side, as if they'd coordinated their arrival. "Oliver, what a lovely event," she said, scanning the room with calculating eyes. "It must have cost a fortune. I hope the positive media coverage will be worth the investment." "It's not about media," returned Susanna. "It's about making a difference." "Of course," she smiled. "And how convenient that Grace has so much influence over your philanthropic decisions lately." Oliver felt his irritation rising, but before he could reply, the lights in the ballroom dimmed, and an announcer asked for everyone's attention. Grace walked up to the stage like someone heading to their own trial. She stepped behind the microphone, looked out at the crowd of 250 well-dressed guests, and for a moment it looked like she might turn around and run. "Good evening," she said, her voice a little shaky. "My name is Grace and—" She paused, took a deep breath and continued. "And I grew up in the orphanage we're here to support tonight." A murmur of interest swept through the room. Grace had decided, at the very last minute, to be completely honest about her background. "I know you're all used to presentations full of charts and numbers," she went on, sounding a little more confident now. "But I'd rather talk about people, about children with names, dreams, and stories all their own." She began talking about Tommy, Sarah, and Michael, and Oliver could see the audience leaning forward, truly listening. Grace was finding her rhythm. "What these kids need isn't pity," she said, her voice now steady. "They need opportunity. Someone who believes they can be anything they want to be." That's when Grace got a little too animated, talking about hope, and accidentally bumped into a waiter passing by with a tray of champagne. The waiter tried to regain balance, but it was too late. The tray flew, and the champagne dramatically splashed all over Robert Whitfield, one of the most important businessmen in Seattle. The room fell completely silent. Grace looked at the soaked businessman, the shocked audience, and then at Oliver, her face frozen in horror. She stammered. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm so sorry. I didn't— Are you going to sue me? Because I don't have money for a lawyer. I just have a cousin who watches a lot of Law and Order." The tension was thick. Whitfield stood there, dripping champagne, his face unreadable. Oliver watched Grace's future unraveling in real time, and didn't hesitate. He quickly stepped onto the stage. "Robert," he said, grabbing a napkin from a nearby table, "looks like Grace decided you needed a drink earlier than expected." Whitfield stared at him for a moment that felt like forever. Then, to everyone's surprise, he started laughing. "Well, Oliver, in 30 years of charity events, I can honestly say this is the first time I've become part of the presentation." Grace visibly relaxed. "Mr. Whitfield, you're very kind. I promise next time I'll keep my hands glued to my sides." "Next time?" Whitfield smiled. "Young lady, after a performance like that, you'll have invitations to events all over the city. Anyone who can make me laugh after soaking me in champagne definitely has my support." From that moment, the night shifted. Grace, now more at ease after surviving what she called the champagne disaster, gave her presentation with honesty and humor. She made the audience laugh with her stories, cry with her heartfelt descriptions of the children's needs, and open their wallets because of her genuine passion. When the presentation ended, the response was overwhelming. The donations exceeded all expectations. Hours later, as the event wrapped up and the last guests were leaving, Oliver found Grace out on the convention center terrace, gazing at the lit-up city skyline. "So," he said, walking up beside her, "how does it feel to survive your first gala event?" "Like I was hit by a truck full of fancy people," she replied with a laugh. "But, you know, a well-meaning truck. You were amazing in there. I spilled champagne on the richest man in Seattle, and he loved it, just like everyone else. Grace, you raised more money in one night than the orphanage gets in a whole year." Grace turned to him, and Oliver noticed her eyes were filled with tears. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me, for giving me this chance, for everything." "Thank you," he replied, stepping closer, "for showing me what really matters." They stood there, on the terrace, the sounds of the city below mixing with the comfortable silence between them. Oliver looked at Grace, her hair slightly messy from the busy night, the elegant dress she still didn't seem used to, the genuine smile lighting up her face, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. "Grace," he said, his voice lower now. "Yes?" He didn't know how to explain what he was feeling, so he simply leaned in and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, hesitant at first, but it quickly deepened as Grace responded. When they pulled away, both were slightly out of breath. "That," Grace began, "was unexpected," Oliver finished. "But not bad," she added, blushing. "Definitely not bad." They smiled at each other, and for a moment the world felt perfect. But not everything that feels perfect truly is. Downstairs, Daisy and Susanna were quietly watching through the window, having seen the kiss from behind the glass. "Well," Daisy murmured to Susanna, "this changes everything, doesn't it?" "It does," Susanna agreed, already calculating. "But maybe not in the way they're hoping." The smiles on both their faces did not promise anything good for the couple on the terrace. The following Monday, Oliver's penthouse had a strange new energy. Grace was humming more off-key than usual as she made breakfast, and Oliver kept finding reasons to walk through the kitchen every 5 minutes, as if he needed to check whether the microwave was still working. "Mr. Grant," Grace said, not turning from the pan where she was scrambling eggs, "you've walked through here 4 times since you woke up. You checking to see if I'm stealing the spices, or do you actually want to say something?" Oliver stopped at the kitchen doorway, caught in the act. "I was just checking if you needed anything." "Uh-huh." Grace turned with a playful smile. "And this has nothing to do with that Saturday night kiss?" Oliver's face turned red. "Grace, about that." "Relax, Mr. Grant. I'm not going to sue you for harassment or anything," she laughed. "But I'll admit, I'm a little confused. I mean, is it normal to kiss your boss? Because I don't remember that part in the housekeeping manual." Before Oliver could respond, the intercom buzzed. James announced an unexpected visitor, David Richardson, a board member from the foundation that had hosted the event. "Send him up," Oliver said, intrigued. 15 minutes later, David was in the living room, a well-dressed man in his 40s with a charming smile and a clear interest in Grace. "Oliver, my friend, I came personally to thank you for Saturday's spectacular event," David said, though his eyes kept drifting toward Grace, who had entered with the coffee tray. "All the credit goes to Grace," Oliver replied, noting just how focused David was on her. "Ah yes, the lovely Grace." David stood as she approached. "May I say, miss, your presentation was the most genuine I've seen in years of attending charity events." Grace blushed. "Thank you, Mr. Richardson, though I'm pretty sure the others didn't include flying champagne." David laughed heartily. "Exactly. It was refreshing. In fact," he leaned forward slightly, "I was wondering if you'd like to have lunch with me this week. I have some ideas for expanding the orphanage project." Oliver felt something unpleasant stir in his stomach. It was like someone had swallowed an angry squirrel, and now the squirrel was doing acrobatics. "That's very kind of you," Grace said, "but I'm not sure if—" "It would be purely professional, of course," David continued, with a smile that Oliver found annoyingly charming. "Maybe we could discuss starting a mentorship program for the older kids." Grace glanced at Oliver, as if asking for permission. "Grace is free to have lunch with whoever she wants," Oliver said, trying to sound casual, and failing badly. David handed Grace his business card. "Perfect. How about Thursday? I know a lovely place downtown." After David left, the apartment felt oddly quiet. Oliver busied himself with papers in his office, more intensely than necessary, while Grace finished tidying up the living room. "Mr. Grant," she finally said, "are you okay? Because you look like someone stole your favorite ice cream." "I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be?" "I don't know. Maybe because you're signing those papers so hard you're about to poke through them?" Oliver looked down. She was right. He put the pen down. "Grace, are you going to have lunch with him?" "I don't know. Should I?" "Like I said, you're free to do whatever you want." Grace walked closer to his desk. "Mr. Grant, can I ask you something? Are you jealous?" Jealous? Oliver tried to laugh, but it came out more like a squeak. That's ridiculous. Why would I be jealous? I don't know. Why would you? They stared at each other for a moment, the tension building. Maybe, Oliver finally said, because I don't like the idea of other men taking you to lunch. And why does that bother you? Because, Oliver hesitated, then chose honesty, because what happened Saturday night meant something to me, and I was hoping it meant something to you too. Grace sat down in the chair across from him. It did. Much more than it should have. Why more than it should have? Because it's complicated, Mr. Grant. Very complicated. Oliver, my name is Oliver. And why is it complicated? Grace sighed. Because you're you, and I'm me. You live in a penthouse worth more than the GDP of some small countries. I share an apartment with a roommate who collects haunted porcelain dolls. So your world is made of charity galas, imported cars, and people who use words I have to look up in the dictionary. My world is made of buses, tiny apartments, and people who think caviar is just a fancy kind of fish. Oliver laughed. Grace, do you really think I care about any of that? You should, she said, fidgeting with her hands. Oliver, I don't know how to be a millionaire's girlfriend. I don't know what to wear in fancy restaurants. I don't know the rules of your world. I'll probably mess things up and embarrass you. You embarrass me? Grace, you're the most genuine person I know. You made Robert Whitfield laugh after you spilled champagne on him. You turned 200 hot dogs into an unforgettable party. And you talk to children like they're the most important people in the world. But that's not enough for your world. It is enough for my world. In fact, it's more than enough. It's perfect. Grace looked him in the eyes. Are you sure? Because once we start this, there's no turning back. And I don't know if I could handle it if you changed your mind later. There was so much vulnerability in her voice that it broke Oliver's heart. He stood up, walked around the table, and knelt down beside her chair. Grace, look at me. When she did, he continued, I'm not going to change my mind. You made me realize I've spent years surrounded by people who pretend to care about me because of my money. You care about me in spite of my money. That's worth more than any fortune. But what if I don't know how to act? What if your sophisticated friends think I'm just some small-town girl? Then they don't deserve to know you. And honestly, after what I saw during the credit card challenge, I think my sophisticated friends could learn a lot from you. Grace gave a shy smile. You really think so? I do. In fact, I have a confession to make. What is it? I'm scared too. Of what? Of not being good enough for you. Grace looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Oliver, you're a millionaire. I clean bathrooms for a living. And you're the most generous, funny, and kind person I've ever met. Her smile. I'm a grumpy workaholic who didn't know the difference between philanthropy and showing off until you taught me. You're not grumpy. Well, not always. See? You're already being too generous with me. They both laughed, and the tension in the room began to fade. So, Grace said, what do we do now? Now, you decide if you want to have lunch with David Richardson or with me. Let me think. Grace pretended to seriously consider. A rich, charming man who can take me to fancy restaurants, or my boss who thinks cereal counts as dinner when he's working late. Hey, that cereal was organic and expensive. Sold. Grace smiled. But only if you promise not to look like a sad puppy every time some guy talks to me. I promise to try. And you have to stop pretending to check the microwave every 5 minutes. That wasn't pretending. I was genuinely worried about the microwave. Oliver, all right. I promise to be less obvious about my neurotic need to be near you. Better. While they laughed and talked, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the building across the street. Daisy was sitting in a cafe with a perfect view of Oliver's penthouse through the large glass windows. She lowered the binoculars and picked up her phone. Susanna, it's me. We need to talk. Right away. Is something wrong? Let's just say our little maid friend just became a much bigger problem than we thought. Daisy hung up and looked once more at the couple in the penthouse, now sitting close, talking intimately. A cold smile formed on her lips. If Grace thought she could just walk into Oliver's life and take her place without consequences, she was badly mistaken. Some people needed to learn the hard way where they belonged in this world. And Daisy was more than willing to teach that lesson. 3 days after the conversation in the penthouse, Grace was in the kitchen making lunch when she heard Oliver's phone ringing nonstop in the office. Normally, she wouldn't have paid attention, but there was something urgent in the tone of the ringtone that made her pause and listen. "James, cancel all my meetings for today," she heard Oliver's tense voice say, "and prepare a press statement. We need to control this before it gets out of hand." Grace frowned. She rarely saw Oliver that shaken over work. She went back to preparing the salad, but couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The phone rang again, and this time she heard James answer. "Mr. Grant's office? Yes, he's aware of the article. No, we have no comment at this time. Thank you." Grace was starting to feel worried when Oliver came into the kitchen, wearing an expression she had never seen on him before, a mix of anger and concern. "Oliver, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Grace, I need to show you something, but first I want you to know that I don't believe a single word of what's written." "What are you talking about?" Oliver hesitated, then picked up the tablet and opened a local news website. The headline made Grace feel like she'd been punched in the stomach. "Scandal. Housekeeper accused of embezzling funds from charity event." What? Grace took the tablet with trembling hands and began to read. The article claimed that sources close to the charity event had revealed Grace used her position of trust to divert some of the raised funds for self-promotion and personal gain. It cited evidence that she had inflated the costs of supplies for the orphanage and pocketed the difference. This is a lie." Grace looked at Oliver with wide eyes. "Oliver, you know this isn't true, right?" "Of course I know. Grace, I was there. I saw where every cent went. This is clearly a setup. But who would do something like this, and why?" Before Oliver could answer, the phone rang in the penthouse. James appeared at the kitchen entrance with a grim expression. "Mr. Grant, it's Channel 7 News. They're asking for a statement about the accusations against Miss Grace." Oliver ran a hand through his hair. Tell them we're preparing an official response." Grace stared at him. "An official response? Oliver, why didn't you just say it's a lie?" "Because," Oliver hesitated, "because I have to be careful with what I say to the press. I need all the facts before making a public statement." "All the facts? What facts? You were there. You know I didn't do this." "Grace, I know, but—" "But?" Her voice dropped, but it was full of hurt. "There's a but?" Oliver realized he'd stepped into dangerous territory. "Grace, it's not that I doubt you. It's just that I need to protect the foundation, the project, your reputation." "My reputation?" Grace let out a bitter laugh. "Oliver, my reputation just got destroyed online, and you think you're protecting it by playing it safe?" The phone rang again. This time, it was Grace's cell. She looked at the screen. It was Margaret from the orphanage. "Hello, Margaret?" "Grace, sweetheart, I saw the article. What nonsense. Are you all right?" I'm trying to figure out what's going on." "Well, I want you to know nobody here believes a word of that rubbish. The kids are asking when you're coming to visit again." Grace felt her eyes well up. "Thank you, Margaret. That means a lot to me." When she hung up, Oliver was watching her with a guilty expression. "Grace?" "You know what's funny?" she interrupted him. "Margaret, who's known me for years, knew instantly it was a lie. But you kissed me 3 days ago, and now you need more information." "It's not like that." "It's not?" Grace walked over to the window, turning her back to him. "Oliver, I've spent my whole life being left behind by people who were supposed to trust me. My mother left me at the orphanage. Foster family after foster family gave up on me. And now, when I finally thought I found someone who saw me for who really am." "Grace, I do see you. That hasn't changed." "Hasn't it? Then why didn't you immediately defend my honesty? Why did you hesitate?" Oliver stayed silent because deep down he knew she was right. For a split second when he read the article, a small part of him had wondered if there was any chance he'd been fooled. Not about the money, he knew that was a lie, but about her intentions. And that tiny hesitation had shown through. "Grace, you don't need to explain." She turned to him, and Oliver saw silent tears running down her face. "I understand perfectly." "What did you understand?" "That in the end, I'm just the maid who stepped out of place, and when things get hard, it's easier to back away than to stand up for me." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Then why didn't you pick up the phone and immediately say you know my character? Why didn't you defend the woman you say you love? Oliver realized he had made a terrible mistake. Grace, you're right. I should have reacted differently. You should have. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. But you didn't, and that tells me everything I need to know. Grace left the kitchen and came back a few minutes later with a small backpack. What are you doing? I'm leaving. Leaving where? Leaving the job. Leaving your life. Leaving this whole mess. Grace, you don't have to do this. We'll find out who's behind this. We'll clear your name. Oliver. She stopped at the door and looked him in the eyes. The difference between us is that you think my name needs clearing. I know it never was dirty. And if you don't know that too, then maybe I was wrong about who you really are. Grace, please, don't leave like this. Like what? Disappointed? Hurt? Because that's exactly how I feel. Stay, at least until we fix this. Grace shook her head. Oliver, I spent years in the orphanage watching kids wait for their parents to come back for them. They never did. I learned early on that when someone doubts you, even for a second, it's because deep down they've already decided you're not worth fighting for. I didn't decide that. Yes, you did. The moment you hesitated to defend me, the moment you thought maybe, just maybe, I was capable of stealing money from orphans. Oliver felt like he had been punched, because she was right. For a split second he had doubted her. Not her honesty about the money, but her motivations overall. And now he saw how cruel and unfair that had been. Grace, take care, Oliver. And next time you meet someone who really cares about you, trust her from the start, because it might be the only chance you get. Grace walked out of the penthouse, and Oliver stood there in the empty kitchen, hearing the echo of his own mistakes. The silence that followed was deafening. No off-key singing, no clattering pans, no life in the space she used to fill. James appeared in the doorway a few minutes later. Sir, Channel 7 called again. They want to know if you'll be making any kind of statement. Oliver looked out the window, watching Grace walk down the street below, carrying her little backpack like it held her whole life. James, prepare a full statement defending Grace's integrity. I want it strong, with no room for doubt. Yes, sir. May I ask what made you change your mind about being cautious? Oliver kept watching until Grace turned the corner and disappeared. I just realized I lost the only person who truly matters, and I realized I've been a complete fool. Sir? James, cancel everything I have today. I need to find out who did this to her, and then I need to figure out how to earn back the trust of someone I never deserved in the first place. James nodded and quietly left, leaving Oliver alone with the weight of his hesitation and the certainty that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The penthouse had never felt so empty, so cold, so lifeless. And Oliver realized that all the money in the world couldn't buy back what he had lost through his lack of faith. 48 hours after Grace left the penthouse, Oliver had become a male version of an obsessed private investigator. Papers were scattered all over his office desk, 3 cups of cold coffee sat abandoned, and he wore an expression James had only seen once before. When Oliver discovered someone was trying to buy his company behind his back. James, Oliver said, looking up from a pile of printed-out social media posts, I need your help. Of course, sir. Though I should mention, you're looking a bit wild. Oliver glanced at his reflection in the window. James was right. His hair was a mess, his beard was growing in, and there was a coffee stain on his dress shirt. James, I need you to do something that might seem a little unconventional. Sir, I worked for you during that phase when you decided to learn the saxophone at 3 in the morning. My definition of unconventional is pretty broad. Good. Because we need to investigate Daisy and Susanna, discreetly. James raised an eyebrow. Investigate how exactly? Like detectives, undercover detectives. Sir, may I suggest we hire actual professionals for that? There's no time. I need evidence now, and besides... Oliver stood up with a determination James recognized as possibly problematic. This is personal. 2 hours later, Oliver was unrecognizable. James had managed to find a black beret, sunglasses, and a fake mustache that made Oliver look like a spy movie actor from the 1970s. Sir, James said, adjusting his own disguise, which included a fishing hat and a glued-on beard, may I point out that we look like 2 people running away from a circus? Perfect. No one will recognize us. The plan was simple. Oliver would follow Daisy while James would track Susanna. They'd meet at 5 o'clock to compare notes. Oliver started his mission at the cafe where Daisy usually had lunch. He ordered a coffee, sat at a nearby table, and pretended to read a newspaper while watching her. Everything was going smoothly until he realized he was holding the newspaper upside down. "Excuse me," said an older lady at the next table. "Are you all right? Because you're reading the news in a very creative way." Oliver quickly turned the paper around. "Oh, I like to challenge my brain by reading from different perspectives." The lady gave him a look that said she thought he might be slightly unstable and quietly moved to another table. 15 minutes later, Daisy showed up. She sat at a table near the window and immediately pulled out her phone. Oliver tried to get close enough to hear the conversation, but in the process, he knocked over a chair, drawing everyone's attention in the cafe. "Sorry," he mumbled, trying to hide behind his fake mustache. Daisy looked toward the noise but didn't seem to recognize him. Oliver breathed a sigh of relief and managed to position himself close enough to catch parts of the phone call. "Yes, the story is spreading just as we planned," Daisy was saying. "Her reputation is ruined. No, Oliver hasn't made any public statement defending her yet. Perfect. Now we just wait for him to realize she's not worth the scandal." Oliver felt his blood boil. He had to stop himself from standing up and confronting her right there. Daisy went on. "Susanna did an excellent job planting the story with her media contacts. Yes, the evidence we made up is pretty convincing. Oliver's always been too smart for his own good, but when it comes to women, he's surprisingly naive." That was the last straw. Oliver stood up abruptly, but in the sudden movement, his fake mustache fell into the coffee cup at the next table. "My mustache!" he shouted instinctively, then realized what he had just said. The entire cafe turned to look. Daisy looked too, and for a moment their eyes met. Oliver saw the exact instant she recognized him, even without the mustache. "Oliver?" she said, eyes wide. No, I'm Roberto. Roberto with the mustaches. I sell mustaches." Daisy slowly stood up. "Oliver Grant, what are you doing here dressed up as whatever that is?" "Finding out the truth about you," he said, giving up the act. "I heard everything, Daisy, about you fabricating evidence, planting the story in the media." Daisy smiled coldly. "Did you prove anything? Because all you've got is the word of a man who was spying on people with a fake mustache." She had a point. Oliver realized that even though he heard the confession, he had no real proof. "But you know what, Oliver?" Daisy continued. "I did you a favor. I saved you from a gold digger who was just waiting for the right moment to make her move." "Grace is not a gold digger. She didn't even know I had money when she started working for me." "Oh, please. Of course she knew. You think someone takes a job in a penthouse without knowing who the boss is?" Oliver hesitated for a second. It was true Grace knew he had money, but that doesn't matter, he said finally. "She never asked me for anything. She never tried to take advantage. Not yet. I bet now she'll show up with some emotional distress lawsuit." "You don't know Grace. I know women like her, and you should too after everything you've been through." Daisy grabbed her purse and stood up. "Oliver, when you're done playing Prince and Pauper, give me a call. I'm still willing to forgive you for this crazy phase." She walked out of the cafe, leaving Oliver alone with his discoveries and a fake mustache floating in a cup of coffee. Meanwhile, James was having his own little investigation at the office where Susanna worked. Disguised as a flower delivery man, he managed to get inside the building and was trying to find out more about her role in the scandal. "Delivery for Susanna Williams," he told the receptionist. "She's in a meeting. You can leave it here. Actually, I need her signature in person. These are expensive flowers." The receptionist sighed. "Room 1205. But make it quick." James went up to the 12th floor and found Susanna on the phone in her office. The door was slightly open, allowing him to hear the conversation. "Yes, Mom, I know it sounds cruel, but it's business. Oliver needs to understand there are consequences to his romantic choices." "No, I don't feel bad. That woman was clearly taking advantage of him." James moved closer but accidentally bumped into the hallway plant. The noise made Susanna glance at the door. "Excuse me," James said, pretending to recover himself. "Flowers for you." Susanna frowned. "I didn't order flowers." "Oh, but someone did. A secret admirer, maybe?" James stepped into the office and placed the flowers on her desk, discreetly pressing the record button on the phone Oliver had given him. "Who sent them?" Susanna asked. "I'm afraid I can't say, ma'am. Professional flower delivery confidentiality." Susanna seemed to accept the answer and went back to her call as James left. He stayed just outside the door, recording the rest of the conversation. Now, where was I? Oh yes, Grace is already out of Oliver's life, just like we planned. Now we just have to wait for him to realize he needs someone at his own social level. At 5 in the afternoon, Oliver and James met at the penthouse to compare what they'd found. Both looked visibly tired and still a bit ridiculous in the remnants of their disguises. "Sir," James said, "I got a recording of Susanna admitting to being part of the plan. And you? I heard Daisy confess everything, but I couldn't record it. Still, between the two pieces of evidence, I think we've got enough. What do we do now?" Oliver looked out the window toward the city, thinking about Grace. "Now we clear her name. And then I'll have to figure out how to earn back the trust of someone I hurt deeply." "Sir, may I say something?" "Of course. Miss Grace wasn't like the others, and you knew that from the very first day." Oliver nodded sadly. "I did know. And I still doubted her. What kind of man does that make me?" "A man who made a mistake, sir, but also a man who's willing to make it right." Oliver pulled off the last bit of his fake mustache and threw it in the trash. "James, set everything up for a press conference 1 week from today. It's time to tell the truth." 1 week after their undercover investigation, Oliver stood in front of St. Francis' home with a determination he hadn't felt in days. In his hands, he held a folder with all the evidence he'd gathered about Daisy and Susanna, and a heart full of regret and hope. Margaret greeted him at the door with a warm smile. "Mr. Grant, it's so good to see you. The kids have been asking when you'd come back." "Actually, Margaret, I'm here for a very specific reason. I need your help organizing something special." "Of course, dear. What do you need?" "I want to give a presentation here today. For the press, for the people who support the orphanage, and most of all, for Grace." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Grace? She hasn't been around since that awful story in the news." "That's exactly what I want to talk about. Margaret, Grace is innocent. I have proof of who really set her up." "Of course she's innocent." Margaret looked almost offended at the suggestion. "That girl has the purest heart I've ever seen. Who would believe such nonsense?" Oliver lowered his head, ashamed. "I almost did. For a moment, I doubted her, and now I have to make it right." Margaret studied him with wise eyes. "Ah, I see. You're not just here to clear her name, are you?" "No. I'm here because I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I need a chance to make it up to her." "And does she know you're coming today?" "No. Actually, I don't even know if she'll show up." Margaret smiled. "Leave that to me. Grace has never been able to resist a story about kids in need, and today's a special activity day with the new children who arrived this week." 2 hours later, the orphanage courtyard was filled with people. Journalists, supporters of the institution, a few local officials, and most importantly, curious children who didn't quite understand why so many grown-ups were in their play space. Oliver was more nervous than he'd ever been before a presentation. This wasn't about sales numbers or corporate strategies. It was about the woman he loved and the future he had nearly ruined with his lack of trust. "Everyone," Margaret said into the microphone, "we have with us today Mr. Oliver Grant, who has something important to share." Oliver stepped onto the small makeshift stage, looked at the crowd, and for a moment felt like he might faint. Then he saw Grace. She was standing in the back of the courtyard, clearly having arrived without knowing what was going on. She wore jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair tied back in a ponytail, and had a look of complete confusion when she saw him there. "Good afternoon," Oliver began, his voice slightly shaky. "First of all, I want to apologize for turning this peaceful place into a media circus. But there are some truths that need to be told, and I couldn't think of a better place to say them." He took a deep breath and went on. "As many of you know, recent accusations were made against Grace Williams, an extraordinary woman who gives her free time to help the children of this institution. Not only were those accusations false, but they were deliberately fabricated." A murmur spread through the crowd. Grace remained still, watching. I have here evidence, Oliver held up the folder, that proves 2 people from my social circle conspired to slander Grace for purely personal reasons. Daisy Patterson and Susanna Torres created false documents, planted stories in the media, and tried to destroy the reputation of a woman whose only fault was having too big of a heart. Journalists began scribbling furiously in their notepads. But I'm not just here to reveal the truth about this scandal. I'm here to reveal the truth about myself. Oliver searched the crowd for Grace. She had moved a little closer, but still kept her distance. When those accusations came up, I failed Grace in the worst possible way. For a moment, a terrible and inexcusable moment, I doubted her. Not her honesty about the money. I always knew that part was a lie. But I doubted her intentions. And in doing that, I showed that I knew absolutely nothing about the woman I claimed to love. Grace stopped walking. Her eyes widened. Because if I truly knew Grace, Oliver continued, his voice growing stronger, I'd know she's incapable of doing anything that would hurt a child. I'd know she would rather go hungry than take food from someone in need. I'd know she's the most genuine, funny, caring, and honest person I've ever met. Tommy, one of the kids Oliver had met at the hot dog party, tugged on Grace's shirt. Grace, why are you crying? Grace quickly wiped her eyes. I'm not crying, Tommy. It's just dust in the air. But there's no wind today, the boy replied, with the sharp logic only a child can deliver. Oliver smiled on stage, overhearing the exchange. Grace Williams, he said now, speaking directly to her, you taught me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in how many smiles you can create. You taught me that generosity isn't about how much you give, but about giving everything you can. You taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who makes you want to be a better person. Grace was clearly struggling to hold back tears. And I want to be a better person, Oliver went on. I want to be the man you deserve, the man who trusts you from the beginning, who stands up for you without hesitation, who sees your worth not in spite of where you came from, but because of who you chose to become. Sarah, another child, whispered something in Grace's ear. Grace shook her head, but Sarah insisted, gently nudging her toward the stage. What did she say? Oliver asked, stepping away from the microphone. Grace was just a few steps away now, still hesitant. She said, Grace cleared her throat, that if you're apologizing in front of everyone, it must mean you really mean it, and that I should give you a second chance, because everyone deserves a second chance. Sarah is very wise, Oliver said, smiling. Yes, kids have a way of making things simple. Michael, the boy who collected little stones, ran over and held Grace's hand. Grace, are you sad because of the handsome man? Not exactly, Michael. Then why don't you go talk to him? When I'm sad, Margaret always says talking helps. Grace looked at Michael, then at Oliver, then at all the people watching, waiting for her answer. Michael, sometimes grown-ups make things complicated. Sometimes when someone hurts you, it's hard to trust again. But you taught us that everyone messes up sometimes, and that forgiving makes you feel better. Grace laughed through her tears. I really said that? You did. When Tommy broke my favorite drawing and I got mad, you said holding a grudge is like holding on to trash. It just stinks and doesn't do any good. Grace looked at Oliver, who was watching the conversation with a mix of hope and nervousness. You know what, Michael? You and Sarah are right. She let go of the boy's hand and walked confidently toward the stage. Oliver quickly stepped down to meet her halfway. Grace, You're an idiot, she said, but she was smiling. I am. Completely. An idiot who almost lost the best thing that ever happened to him. Almost? Grace stepped even closer. Oliver Grant, if you ever doubt me again, I'll make you eat my burnt food for the rest of your life. I'll take the punishment. And you'll have to put up with my off-key singing every morning. I already miss it. And never again, will you hesitate to trust me. Because I'm not like the other people in your world. I'm me. And if that's not enough... Oliver interrupted her with a kiss. It was a kiss filled with apology, love, a promise for the future, and deep relief, all at once. When they finally pulled apart, the entire courtyard was cheering. Reporters, supporters, staff, and most of all, 20 kids making as much noise as possible. Does this mean you're getting married? Tommy shouted over the crowd. Grace and Oliver laughed, still wrapped in each other's arms. Maybe, Grace answered. if he promises never to wear a fake mustache again. How did you know about the fake mustache? James told me everything. Apparently, you made a complete fool of yourself trying to investigate Daisy. Completely ridiculous, Oliver admitted. Good, because if you're going to fight for me, I'd rather it be as your true self. Even if you're a bit clumsy when it comes to spying. Oliver kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no doubt, no fear. Only the certainty that he had found his true home, not in the luxury penthouse, but in the arms of the woman who loved him exactly as he was. 6 months after their reconciliation at the orphanage, life had taken a turn neither Oliver nor Grace could have imagined. The penthouse, once a cold symbol of corporate success, had become something entirely different. A real home, constantly filled with laughter, lively conversations, and occasionally Grace's off-key singing in the kitchen. Oliver, Grace called from the kitchen on a Saturday morning. I need your help in here. And bring James too. Oliver walked in to find Grace surrounded by at least 15 children from the orphanage, all wearing makeshift aprons made from tablecloths, trying to help with the weekly community lunch that had become a tradition at the penthouse. What happened here? Oliver asked, taking in the flour that had made its way onto nearly every surface in the kitchen. Tommy decided he knows how to make bread, Grace explained, brushing flour out of her hair. And apparently, a pinch of yeast in his language means the whole packet. The dough is growing by itself, Tommy shouted, pointing at a bowl that looked like it was about to overflow. It's magic. It's science, Sarah corrected him, always the most studious of the group. Yeast releases gases that make the dough expand. Magic or science, Oliver said, rolling up his sleeves. We're going to need help if we want to stop this dough from taking over the entire kitchen. James appeared at the doorway and calmly observed the chaos, clearly used to the new reality of the penthouse. May I suggest we order pizza? He said diplomatically. Absolutely not, Grace protested. These kids deserve a homemade meal, even if I have to wrestle this dough myself. 2 hours later, after plenty of teamwork, laughter, and a few small battles with stubborn ingredients, the kitchen was finally back in order, and lunch was ready. The dining table, which once seated only Oliver in his elegant solitude, was now filled with cheerful voices, funny stories, and the contagious energy of children who felt truly at home. Mr. Oliver, said Michael, the pebble collector, tugging at his shirt sleeve, when are you going to ask Grace to marry you? Oliver nearly spit out his juice. Michael, Grace turned red as a tomato. You don't just ask things like that. Why not? Michael looked genuinely confused. You're always kissing, and Margaret says when two grown-ups like each other a lot and keep kissing, they get married. Out of the mouths of children, James murmured, hiding a smile. Well, Oliver said, deciding to face the question head-on, maybe that's something Grace and I should talk about. You haven't already? Tommy asked. Because you already live together, you already take care of us together, you already argue about burnt food. I do not burn food, Grace protested. Yes, you do, came the unified reply from the group of kids. All right, Grace laughed, surrendering. Fine, I burn food sometimes, but that has nothing to do with getting married. Yes, it does, Sarah said seriously. Because if you get married, Mr. Oliver will have to eat your burnt food forever. That's a big commitment. Oliver laughed. Sarah's right. It's a decision that takes courage. Hey. Grace threw a napkin at him. Aren't you supposed to be on my side? Always, Oliver said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Burnt food and all. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparations. Oliver had decided that if he was going to ask Grace to marry him, he was going to do it right, surrounded by the people who truly mattered to them. The proposal happened on a Friday night during one of their community dinners. Oliver had secretly asked the children for help, and they were more excited than he was about the plan. Grace, Oliver said, standing up during dessert, I have something to tell you. If it's about that pan I burned yesterday, I already apologized. It's not about the pan. Oliver got down on one knee beside her chair, and the room fell into a hush. Grace Williams, you've changed my life in ways I didn't even know were possible. You turned a house into a home. You turned a lonely man into someone with a family. You took an empty fortune and gave it purpose. Grace's eyes were filled with tears. Oliver, "Will you marry me?" he asked, pulling a small box from his pocket. "And before you answer, just know the proposal comes with a few conditions." "What conditions?" Grace laughed through her tears. "First, you'll have to put up with my irrational jealousy when other men look at you. Second, you'll need to teach me how to cook, because by now it's clear my survival in the kitchen depends on you. And third, you have to accept that our house will always be full of noisy kids on the weekends." "And will you accept my conditions too?" Grace asked. "What are they?" "First, you'll have to deal with my off-key singing every morning. Second, you'll have to accept that I'll burn the food at least once a week. And third, you have to promise you'll never doubt me again, even when I do something that seems completely crazy." "I accept all the conditions," Oliver said. "So?" "Of course I will, you silly man." Grace threw her arms around him, almost knocking him over in the process. The wedding took place 2 months later, in the spring, in the gardens of St. Francis' home. Oliver had insisted on keeping it simple, and Grace agreed, as long as they could include all the children from the orphanage in the ceremony. The result was a celebration no one would ever forget. Grace wore a simple but elegant dress, while Oliver chose a navy blue suit that matched perfectly with the relaxed theme of the event. Margaret officiated the ceremony, and the children served as ring-bearers, flower girls, and apparently spontaneous commentators. "You can kiss now," Tommy shouted before Margaret had even finished the ceremony. "Tommy, we're not at that part yet," Sarah whispered. "But they've already kissed a bunch of times. Why do they have to wait?" Margaret laughed. "Well, maybe we can move things along. Oliver, do you take Grace as your wife, in sickness and in health, with burnt food and edible food alike?" "I do," Oliver said, smiling. "Grace, do you take Oliver as your husband, in moments of sanity and moments of fake mustaches for spy missions?" "I do," Grace laughed. "Then now you may kiss." The kiss was interrupted by Michael, who had been tasked with carrying the rings on a small pillow. In the excitement of the moment, he tripped, and Oliver's ring flew through the air. "I lost the ring," Michael shouted in a panic. "Don't worry," Oliver said calmly. "The ring isn't what matters." "But it doesn't count without the ring," Tommy protested. "I found it," Sarah called out, holding up the ring, which had rolled under a chair. Crisis averted. The party lasted the rest of the afternoon. There was live music from a local group, food prepared collectively by all the guests, including a few questionably edible contributions from the kids, and lots of dancing. Oliver and Grace opened the dance floor with a simple waltz, but even that romantic moment didn't go uninterrupted by the children. "You're dancing wrong," Tommy shouted. "It's like this." And he began moving in ways that looked more like fighting invisible monsters than dancing. "Actually, they're dancing perfectly," Margaret said, watching the couple with a tearful smile. "They're dancing like two people who found their rhythm." As night fell and soft lights lit up the garden, Oliver and Grace finally had a quiet moment to themselves. They sat on a bench near the rose bushes, watching the children run around the garden with makeshift lanterns. "So, Mr. Grant," Grace said, resting her head on his shoulder, "how does it feel to be a married man? Happy, whole, and slightly worried about what you're going to burn for breakfast tomorrow." "Very funny," Grace laughed. "For your information, I've already decided to make pancakes. What could possibly go wrong?" "Do you want the alphabetical list or the chronological one?" "Oliver, I'm kidding." He kissed the top of her head. "I don't care if you burn the whole kitchen, as long as we're together." How romantic and slightly concerning. They sat in silence for a few minutes, just watching the children play and listening to their laughter echo through the garden. "Oliver," Grace said softly. "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that family isn't about sharing the same genes or growing up in the same house. It's about choosing to love and care for each other, even when it's hard." Oliver looked around, at the children running, at Margaret chatting with James over some joke, at the true friends they'd found along the way, and realized Grace was right. He had started this journey trying to figure out who really cared about him. And he ended up discovering something far more valuable. That true love isn't about finding people who love you for what you have, but finding people you can love unconditionally. "Thank you," he said, pulling her closer, "for teaching me the difference between having a house and having a home." And there, under the stars and surrounded by the sound of children's laughter, Oliver and Grace officially began their life together. A life that would be filled with burnt food, off-key singing, orphanages always needing help, and an impossible amount of love. What did you think of Oliver and Grace's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories, and don't forget to check out more emotional stories right here on the final screen.